So I have with me Warren Smith. The way I came across you is the same way that I think most people who have gotten familiar with you have come across you through that viral video. I was quite sad to hear that you are no longer working at the school, and it seems like a lot of students have lost a great teacher. But before we get too deep into that, I'd love to just get you to, introduce yourself and tell me how you got into teaching in the first place.
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Warren Smith, obviously. I got into teaching. Well, my background was in filmmaking, and I used to just want to make movies. And so I went out to LA and lived out there for a few years, and then I went freelance. And eventually I realized I don't want to live on the West Coast. I want to live on the East Coast. My parents were both professors. It was a great lifestyle. It allows you to do the thing that you teach and have resources and backing. And so I thought, what better job than to maybe one day be able to teach filmmaking at a college level? And so I went to graduate school, applied to some schools, got a scholarship to Emerson, moved to Boston in 2016, was there for 3 years, started teaching as a graduate assistant. And then, I've been teaching at Emerson part-time ever since. And I started teaching high school the year after grad school. It's the first job I got, full-time job I got right out of grad school. So that's how I got into it. Yeah.
Okay. Very interesting. I didn't realize about the film background. I guess that explains one of your recent videos that was about interviewing one of your professors and about the film industry. Well, I guess just for those not familiar with the viral video, can you sort of describe how that even happened and what was on it and what was the reaction to that?
Well, it was a video that I teach multimedia at high school. They hired me because of my background to kind of teach video editing. And so I was at a public school for 1 year, and then this past school where I've been until now for the past 4 years. But so my class was multimedia, so which can be photography, it can be video editing, 3D printing, Photoshop. It's content creation essentially. So we were doing, I think it was a newscast, and the student that was going to be on camera was kind of feeling a little, he wanted a warm up type thing. He just wanted to ease into it. So I was like, I'll just sit on camera. Let's just treat it like a podcast, which we often record podcasts. But this wasn't a podcast. This was actually a lead up to a broadcast. And I was like, let's just have a conversation. What's something that interests you? And he's like, I want to ask you about J.K. Rowling, or Harry Potter is what he said. I want to ask you about Harry Potter. Cool. We hit record. All right, these guys want to talk about, I guess it was J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling, so what's up? And there was this exchange where there was just a presupposition built into the question. I said, how have your views on Harry Potter changed given J.K. Rowling's bigoted opinions? And first we have to address, well, is that a fair characterization? And now why it resonated, I'm not entirely sure. I thought it was interesting enough to upload, but I didn't. And I wasn't on X or anything. Someone else brought it over to X, and I don't know. I can't explain these things. But
So you weren't expecting that reaction at all. It was just
no.
an interesting conversation.
Oh yeah.
Well, what I found interesting rather than like the topic itself was really, and what, people would have said, the Socratic method through which you had the student evaluate their own beliefs. And they did change their mind, but they could have gone through that process and not. Maybe the evidence would have held up, or maybe they would have had better evidence to support their claim. What is it now that you're not a philosophy teacher? Do you have any kind of background in philosophy? Is this a way that you think, or that you were taught to think?
It's a highly effective way of interacting with people, and if you're an observant person, you kind of pick up on what's effective in your life, whether it's filmmaking techniques or how to navigate the world. So it was something that honestly I wasn't consciously implementing the Socratic method, I was just having a conversation the most normal, effective way that is just, I guess, it's a stylistic thing that it's subconscious. Um, yeah, I wasn't really thinking about it. So I
I
don't
mean,
think
that
of it as
makes sense.
philosophy. Yeah.
I can understand that. I mean, I think I use a lot of questioning in my everyday life. Also, may have studied, might have read some of these texts, but it wasn't something that I was also conscious of. I always found the questions more effective because they weren't disagreements and they weren't about making a claim. You were allowing that person to clarify their own views, and sometimes they realize, well, they have some missing information, or maybe the supposition is wrong. And it was like a good way I found to not get in trouble when really questioning things. So I would say it worked in my own life as well, and I found it to be a useful tool. Never really would never get in trouble for just asking just asking questions. I don't mean it in that the way that people say as they go into
I
conspiracy theories, but
I agree though. I think there's truth to that, and that's why maybe as a teacher, that's because in that video you see I'm interacting with a student in a way where you don't want to take a position. It's not about your opinion. My opinion doesn't belong in the classroom unless there's something logical to examine, like the underpinnings of a statement. That's interesting, and so yeah, I think that's the best way in all classrooms is to allow conversations to occur. But and again, it goes back to that saying, it's not about like what to think, it's about how to think, and also you're just going to have way more effective conversation because students can sense that when you're being sarcastic or a smart aleck or trying to destroy or disagree. But if you're genuine, you'll be surprised where the conversation can go.
so I've taught some classes both at a university, but also high school. And I remember my students had asked me, "Hey, what's your political orientation?" And I said, "If you can tell, then it failed." And I remember I posted about it on X, and I got swarmed. They were like, "Oh, we could tell, all right." you know. And I thought that was kind of interesting because one, they were wrong, but two, this hostility towards that position, which I would imagine, they would want their teacher to have. Like, what if their teacher has the opposite view of them? Would they want their kids subjected to that? It was just such a strange phenomenon that has like that shift, because even when I went to university, I had a teacher. He was quite known for being kind of very supportive of communism. I'm not very supportive of communism, having come from a country that was communist. Um, it's something that, and people sort of warned that how incredibly communist he is. But the class that I was taking, he taught different kinds of systems, capitalism, libertarianism, communism. And he actually taught it incredibly well, I would say. I think quite fairly. I don't think there was a sense of like, um, these are his beliefs and let's force that on us, in his private life or in his commentary. Because I've read, he occasionally would write like opinion pieces. Yeah, he has a particular point of view, but it never actually came out in the work. And the way that he taught things was in this very neutral way. And I don't feel like there was any judgment of the papers that we may have written in that sense either. So I think to me, he was a great professor. And it became this strange thing where like now you should tell kids what to think. And of course, at that age, they are more impressionable, particularly if they don't have the tools to resist. Um, what are your thoughts on that phenomenon? Like, why do you see that? Why do you think that has shifted so much?
Well, the morality of, I don't know, honestly. And I think it's worse at the college level. You know, I mean, I think fear drives people. It's more than anything. Fear is powerful motivator. And so, I mean, I have had experiences with at the high school level with students where I was asked to teach a journalism class. Student was writing an article. She was the head of the field hockey team. It's my first year teaching, and a teammate had been injured by a trans athlete, and it was the second time this specific athlete had injured one of their teammates in a previous game. She couldn't get a quote from anyone, any adults, so I could see fear, and I see it at the high school level. There's a bit more because parents have the ability to say enough is enough if they are so inclined in some cases. You don't have that at college. They're not there. They're not present. They don't see anything, and you have teachers with tenure, and it's just they're two different ball games.
Hmm.
That's the big question. It goes more philosophically to the times we're living in, and I don't have a tidy answer for that. It would take a while to unpack, but I think it stems from fear. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have, and by the way, it's important to be able to say I don't know. I also don't know that I have the most clear answer. Why did we even get to this place of fear? Because, actually, when I was university age, I would have been pretty. I like to kind of stir up things and be a little bit different from the status quo. And at the time, I would have identified myself as a libertarian, but honestly, just mostly to piss people off. It wasn't even like a tightly held belief. As somebody who was not didn't hold dominant views in the university department that I was in. So I was studying communications and also film. So for me, um, I would say certain things that I'm sure people disagreed with, and they may have gotten irritated. But there wasn't that environment of fear. It wasn't, I didn't have the sense that I couldn't say it, or if I said it, like my professors are going to fail me, or, I didn't feel like I had to pretend. And that applies. I later took some courses that were in the business department, which I would say was much more conservative compared to the incredibly left leaning one that I was in. Uh, and there I was this, my prof immediately kind of made fun of me. And because he knew I came from the communications department and it had a reputation. And, I was kind of a bleeding heart. Like I still am in some ways. So it wasn't like he was completely wrong about my views. But I think what he didn't expect is that I was able to tolerate their views and engage and debate. But that was something that, and I was probably one of the few people who got an A on that class. He never gave out A's. And my
Oh,
group, we did a paper on GMOs and
wow.
we actually got an A. So it was, I found that both sides of the aisle in terms of the ideological breakdown of the university, it was okay for me to express my views, even if my professors didn't fully agree with them. I didn't find that I'd get penalized. And now it's quite different. I think, I haven't been in school for a long time, but certainly from what I hear, and even, my sister's a teacher. And so,
Hmm.
hearing, I don't want to out her too much, but, you know, certainly you are told that there are certain things that you can teach and certain things you can't. And even in the kinds of books you're allowed to teach, like, Animal Farm is not really so tolerated anymore,
Oh,
or
really?
1984 in some schools. Yeah.
Interesting. I
So
didn't know that.
because
What
it's
year did
not
you leave
diverse
college?
enough.
How long has it been?
It was a while ago. It's
Okay.
been
All
many
right.
years, more than a decade. So it's it's definitely a different environment. And if you look at the polling, like Fire does really good studies on how afraid students are, as well as teachers. So teachers, I think, are afraid of their students, and the students are afraid of their fellow students, and maybe their teachers as well. Because I've definitely talked to some people who feel like they they have to play a game in order to get the right grade, and have been successful in doing that actually. But they have to change what they think, and not really engage in what should be academic freedom, debate. I mean, that's if you're going to go anywhere and have a safe space, your safe space should be to have a conversation. And somehow our safe spaces have become, you know, safe from difficult conversations. And I find that change, like, I don't 100% know what caused it. And people ask me that too, but
It's impossible to say, and it's a pendulum. We're going to see it's not going to stop. It's going to swing one way, then the other. It's going to continue 10 years from now, 20 years from now.
oh
It's
yeah, I mean, I already see it. I mean, it's definitely swinging to the other extreme. And I think part of that is a reaction and sort of a correction, but it can also be very dangerous in my view. And what I've noticed that when people don't protect all ideas and the exchange of free ideas,
Mhm.
they really prioritize their ideas. Because right now we have people, when I went to school, freedom of speech was something that was very left wing. And we really talked a lot about it. Debating was something that was done in classes and taught. And it wasn't, it was just a completely different world in that regard. And then suddenly it became this like right wing talking point. And I'm like, why? I want it to be a talking point for everyone, really. But then we're saying right now, with some of the conflicts going on in the world, which I won't get into, but I'm seeing people screaming, "Oh, you're infringing on our freedom of speech," and they're on the other side, and they're the same people who are sort of advocating for shutting down
Mhm.
others.
That
And
is
I just find
interesting.
that,
We are
yes,
in a
I
very
it's
interesting time. I think well, for me, it all started at 2016, and I don't think tensions are as high as they were in 2016, 17, 18, up through COVID even. In the last 2 years, I think there has been some pushback. So, but we are seeing some very unusual things with the protests. So at Emerson College, I just got an email. I saw something on X the other day where Emerson sent out an email, which is very unusual for them to acknowledge that they're in a budget crisis. And they attributed the protest to part of that, bad press coverage for that. They also attributed 3 other causes, which I've never heard of those causes, but it's but that's where the pushback is going to come from. That's why the pendulum has to go the other way. We're going to hopefully we'll start seeing with Hollywood as well. They're going to realize, okay, this is not working. It's backfiring because it's financially driven, these things. So if the college is going to go bankrupt, they're going to adjust because they have to survive. That I believe that's the beauty of the competitive marketplace. That's the beauty of capitalism, is that it keeps us in it keeps that pendulum where it needs to be.
Are you completely out of the film world?
No, I wouldn't say completely. I'm out of Hollywood, that's for sure. I have no interest in working with the unions in Hollywood. I think it's silly. If I were to make a movie, I would do it outside of because it's the union system, because it's just so much wasteful spending. I wouldn't waste my money. It's as
It's funny, I'm
simple
in
as
a
that.
union.
That's okay.
A film
Which
union.
union? Oh,
Yeah, a cinematographer's union.
oh, you're a
So
cinematographer?
I'm not, but I
So
worked
how'd you
as a
get in the
publicist,
union?
and we're in the same. It's the union also represents publicists. So,
Interesting.
um,
Really? I didn't know that.
yeah, and actually, my view on unions is a little more positive, but when they are not in a monopoly situation, because I think specifically in the film industry, it is such a diff it's easy to take advantage of people, and as you know, the hours are insane, and I do value some of the things that the unions do, and in
Sure. Yeah.
protecting, actually my role is the least protected, unfortunately, so I don't get the same benefits, but you know, they check out to make sure things are safe, and if there is a grievance, and there is an opportunity for people to join. So, and it's not like you can't work outside of the union. So that's why I don't really have a problem with them.
Oh,
But
well,
if
that's
you,
fortunate because other unions don't allow that, like SAG, for example,
no, I
in many
mean,
cases.
but no, if you're in the union, you can't. But if you don't want to join the union, nothing stops you from making your own films with people who are not in the union, or you can get some kind of an exemption for a low budget. So there is ways. So I'm not like a complete, yeah. So I have, I'm very anti-union when it comes to things that are essential services, but kind of
Why is
pro
that?
when it comes to, well, because if you have an essential service and you have a strike, that affects people in a way that it doesn't happen, you know, with film, and they're usually in their essential services. So it's a little bit like a mobster thing, you know, versus I don't view it the same way. But in France, for example, they actually don't have unionization for the film industry. So they have these like very specific, quite strict rules just for everyone. And as you may have heard, I worked on a TV show in Paris, and it was very interesting to watch how ours was a little bit more professional, I guess. But like in other cases, including big shows, like sometimes I heard that people will go for a 3 hour lunch and just not come back until 3 hours later. And it's quite a
And
funny thing.
that's like issued by law, you're saying, in France?
Yeah, well, I don't think that's like
Okay.
issued by law. I think that's more cultural.
I got you.
The law says, you know, a certain number of hours, you know, you get a break. You can't work more than a certain number of hours. I think we had shorter days, like because when you work in just the normal Hollywood system, we're talking about, you know,
12
it could
hours
be,
minimum.
yeah, 12 hours minimum, but then it can be, you know, 18 hours, and people might have to drive home, and this is, by the way, where the union kicks in, because the union would come in and say, well, you can't do that. You can't like not provide a hotel if you're having people work for 18 hours. So that's my defense of unions.
I
Not
totally
just because I'm
understand the
in one.
motivation. No, I totally
Yeah,
understand the motivation behind it.
well, it's never helped me because my role is just not the same, and I have a more freewheeling situation going on there. But having observed it with other people, I can understand why they would want those protections. And it's just so easy to take advantage of people in that industry in particular, because people want to be part of it so much, and they're often not going to stand up for themselves. So,
Yeah, it is a
you know,
corrupt rigged game is how I describe it to my students, and
we're gonna have to have a debate on just
I would
unions, and
love
I'll
to.
see.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay,
Maybe we'll get one more person from each side. So we,
sure. That'd be
because
interesting.
I think that would be interesting, because I'm somebody who was kind of opposed to them completely, and I had changed my mind on it quite entirely. And
Huh.
I did union leadership training too, and I was like, I'm still skeptical. Like I'm not a like shocked right now.
No, this
Yeah,
would be a great debate. You'd,
yeah,
you'd be perfect for
it
it.
would be
Yeah.
really fun. I enjoy debates when they're, you know, good faith debates.
Yeah.
Although with debates, the goal tends to be let's win.
Well,
And
you're right, but that's a foolish goal because it's if we were debating unions right now, I'm not debating you. It's detached from either of us or our egos, hopefully, and we're
yeah,
debating the structure, the logic. Okay, well, how's France doing this? What are the ramifications of this system? What are the alternatives? What's going to lead to a better Hollywood in 10 years? We're analyzing everything logically, and it's okay to disagree and have those conversations. But you're
and that
absolutely
sounds
right.
like a conversation rather than a debate, right? Because the
Well,
way
but
that they structure debates, you know, that style, like each person is on a team that wants to win. And I think that can be sometimes problematic, because I would rather be like, hey, you made a good point right there. I haven't thought of it this way. Right. And I don't mind conceding things,
it's a
but in
bit
a
of both.
debate,
Like
you don't.
I would go in. I already have my position on unions, and I'm going to go in and try and articulate that. you have
Hmm.
yours. So we know that going in. So of course I'm going to try and articulate my positions as best I can because I've already thought it through. If I didn't think I already had the best position, I wouldn't be holding that position. So I think it's right, and so I'm going to. So you could call that trying to win, but how you go about it is
Well, would you
different.
be willing to say, okay, Catherine, you made a good point?
Yeah,
Um,
you just made a
okay,
good point
yeah,
earlier
then
about like
that's,
there's a lot of understandable motivations. Like who wouldn't want to have job security, right? Or have
yeah.
someone not be able to push them around. These are primary motivators that are absolutely understandable. So,
And I'm
but
genuinely curious to hear your argument, so I think that would be a good one.
sure,
Okay, let's do it. Now that I have this streaming thing going on too.
yeah.
Um, but so you since that video went viral, you got a lot of attention from people, and I think a lot of positive attention for the most part. At least that's my assumption. Correct me if I'm wrong. You probably got both, did you?
No, it's been in
Positive.
my yeah. It's been generally yeah. The negative is there's always going to be a little negative, but it's not a huge deal.
So, what's your reaction in terms of like, okay, now that I have this, a little bit of a platform, I guess.
Mm.
Um, what did you think that you should do with that?
Oh, I knew so little about all this in this landscape when it occurred. I couldn't even log. I didn't even know my login password into X the day that Elon tweeted that thing. My brother messaged me. He's like, "You gotta log in." I was like, "I can't remember my password, so I had to reset." Anyways, so I don't. I've been figuring it out, trying to figure it out best I can. I wasn't sure what it would bring, but I saw it as it's not a huge accomplishment in itself. It's an opportunity to build to an accomplishment is how I see it. You don't I view it as blind luck. Like it was a one in a million thing. It'll never happen again. And I knew I would regret if I didn't try and see where this road would take me and try my best to make the most
I
out of
mean,
it.
some people would naturally just hide, right?
You're
Like
right.
getting
Some
that much
would.
attention.
You're right. I would view that as I don't. That's not me. I just wouldn't understand the logic of doing that. It's just such a I would regret that if I were to make that decision. And I know what regret feels like. And regret is not something, it's something that I'm going to do my best to avoid. I would rather fail trying than to regret not doing anything. So I've just been trying to navigate it, make the most out of it. Yeah, because it was blind luck. Suddenly you have an opportunity to try and build something. So then it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall, working with what you have, trying to figure this out very quickly. And I still haven't completely figured it out, because often what interests me, I'm like, no one's going to find this interesting, and events have complicated things, but I'm just trying to, yeah, build something, and I
So
would
tell
love
us
to
a
be
little
able
bit
to.
more about what you're building.
Trying to, I'm trying to get to financial stability first and independence. When you are self-sufficient, there's an autonomy. It brings freedom, the ability to say what you think without worrying about losing your job or something like that. And it's and also I genuinely really am fascinated by this space and this platform, this not just this platform, but this whole technological platform. I think it is massively it's revolutionary. And I don't think we fully realize it. We don't fully understand the ramifications of it. The fact that communication it's democratized the ability to reach an audience. So as a filmmaker, that's huge. Content creation, but the spreading as a journalist for someone like you or a writer or being able, it has what you've seen it do to legacy media in main huge corporate media. Now you have all these alternative independent media outlets on YouTube and everything. What that is what's happening to Hollywood as well. It's or it will start soon. What we've seen already with
Yeah.
the news.
And I have mixed feelings on it. I think it has both really positive aspects and also incredibly negative. I just had an argument with my dad, who doesn't know social media at all, but it was defensive And I'm like, no, look, there's all these issues. I'm not saying that, it's all bad, that there are some really positive
Your
things,
dad
but
was
look, like,
defending social media?
he was, yeah. But he doesn't
Interesting.
use it. That's the funny thing. He doesn't understand. He's like, okay, so what is social media? I'm like, okay, the fact that you're asking me this. Me and my dad, I'm not as nice, I think, when I talk to my dad, not as polite. We kind of go at each other a little bit more. But um we had, I think to him, the internet just represented this massive. He ties in social media to just the internet. So in his mind, it's the internet, which he finds to be a spectacular thing because he kept saying, well, you know how, if I had a thought and I was curious to find something out, I had to go out in the cold and find books and, and go to this library. And, and I'm like, listen, I lived before the internet too, Dad. I know what it's like. Um, but he's right. We have access to incredible knowledge.
Hmm.
However,
Hmm.
people don't know necessarily how to sift through that or how to find the things that are
So what would
truthful
the
or
alternative
higher
be?
quality.
Is someone going to sit there and tell them what's true?
Well, the alternative is for people. I want to build better systems of evaluating information and give people better tools for themselves where they can think for themselves, where they can evaluate whether the information is just something that's confirming their existing belief
So
or is
it
it
would be a separate entity set up to tell people what to
not
value and how to
necessarily,
value it?
but for example, we'll use Twitter X as an
Hmm.
example. So since it already has Grok kind of built in, although very much in its infancy, what I wouldn't mind, so I wouldn't want to censor information, but I like community notes, for example. You don't have to listen to them, and you can go to the source and you can say, hey, this doesn't add up. And then you have also, because you have people with different viewpoints voting things up, I think it's not a perfect system, but a pretty good one. I like giving people more context. So Grok can also be something you can use AI to
Hmm.
factually fact check things in real time. So, for example, if somebody said, not opinions, right? But, or things that aren't settled, but things like, if I made a claim, the US was founded in the year 1842.
Hmm.
Okay, that's false. And
Hmm.
that's where Grok or another AI tool can come in and display a thing. Well, actually,
Hmm.
the US was, created blah, blah, blah. And here's
Okay,
more context. Would you like some sources? That's what I want to see.
that's
I'm always
logical.
looking for those kinds of solutions.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And look,
Interesting.
fact checking is just fact checkers, for example, at newspapers, because, I work in media, they were really great, very useful. They weren't fact checking your beliefs. They were fact checking because you may have gotten something wrong. And then a lot of media outlets, because of the economy of things, got rid of them. So there's very few fact checkers anymore. And then fact checking became like an online thing. And the problem with that was now there was a lot of bias. The funding that was coming was from pretty biased sources. And they weren't doing sort of the right job. But then sometimes it works very well. There's a guy I follow at the BBC. I kind of sang his praise because he has remained so neutral about very hot button topics where I can't tell where he sits. And he's been incredibly just consistent and accurate. And that's what good fact checking looks like. You don't have to listen to him. You shouldn't just blankly take it. You build trust over time, but then, he provides the source for you to verify why something is false or something is true. And I think that's where it works well.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think based on how fast, like, facts, false information travels at a speed of 9 times higher than true information,
Why is
and
that?
people share it because it usually affirms their belief. So people are more likely to share something that it affirms their own belief. There's probably more to it that I just don't know, but that seems to be the most likely reason. Um, they tend to be things that are a little bit more scandalous and conspiratorial. So again, people
Hmm.
tend to be more inclined to share those kinds of things,
Hmm.
more loaded.
Yeah. How do you feel about Elon Musk's policy towards freedom of speech on X?
Well, I was excited that he took over initially because I did see I wasn't affected by the previous policy so much because my views weren't so outside of the frame. Um, but other people's were and were affected, and I could recognize that. So I generally am a little bit more free speech oriented. That said, I've my views on this have shifted a little bit,
Oh,
seeing the
interesting.
end
Let's hear it.
result. Yeah,
How so?
well, now you're doing now you're interviewing me. Um, well, I think that belief that sunshine is the best disinfectant is not isn't wrong, but isn't what happens in practice. So what happens is that on these platforms, especially as they start leaning more towards in certain ways, the algorithm isn't perfect, so it can amplify things disproportionately. So somebody who's maybe more nuanced or reasonable and truthful isn't going to get as amplified as something that's a lie. So that's one problem. Second problem is that people will grab it. It's easier for people who share more extreme beliefs to find each other. But the sunshine is being able to talk to them, right, and balance their views, present them with contrary evidence, but instead they segregate themselves. And so, because now they're in a group that's another echo chamber, that echo chamber becomes more and more extreme. So, I do think it can drive extremisms, more extreme views, because they now build communities around these more extreme views. So those are sort of my main contentions, although there's more to that.
Interesting.
But
When you
yeah,
say like non-nuanced arguments get less traction because of the algorithm, that's what you said.
yes, I do. Well, it's not just the algorithm, it's also human nature, right?
S-
I think
So how
people
so? That
react
why is that?
people
Because I
react
yeah.
emotionally to arguments, right?
Hmm.
They it takes more effort for someone, just physical effort even, brain power to analyze something that's a little more deep. It takes more time if you're reading a post that's longer. So, and people react to think more when they are emotionally driven than when they are logically driven. And again, it's like if they hear something, in the beginning of my own journey, if I criticize the media a lot because I have a lot of criticisms for. I've seen how the sausage is made. It's not because I hate media or think that journalism has no value and that journalists don't do anything right. I actually think that's not true. However, I saw the issues within journalism. And so when I started talking about it, because there weren't as many people talking about it, and because I'm a journalist myself in these like very mainstream publications, it drew a lot of attention from people. But it's because it aligned completely with their viewpoint. So that's what they're going to amplify and share. Now, if I currently go and I say, hey, I actually think journalists do a lot of really great work, that's not going to get the same attention or support as me criticizing the media, even if I make a compelling argument for it that is true. Like, even if I went and said, look, the accuracy of these papers, let's say 5 papers, is 95%, and they get 5% wrong. So say I had this like data. I'm not saying that I do. Um, and then compared to social media, which maybe gets 60% right. That's not
Hmm.
going to change their minds because
Right.
they're
That's just a reality of the majority. If it's the majority opinion is at the moment against mainstream journalism, and then you suddenly put out, "Oh, I really like mainstream." Well, they're just disagreeing with you, though. That's not necessarily
and it's
saying that
it's a
nuance
group.
gets less traction. Because I would say, like the video of me, that J.K. Rowling video, that was nuance, and brevity doesn't necessarily mean you can't be nuanced. Perhaps that's why it succeeded because it was so brief, but people viewed it at least as nuance, I guess. And I think that would be an example of. I think there is a hunger for nuance and logic and objectivity. But you're absolutely yeah. It's just yeah. if the majority of the audience doesn't like what you're selling, they're not going to buy it. That's just a reality.
Yeah, but even if that thing is truthful, right? And that's the only way that we can change our minds when presented with new evidence is if we pay attention to this new evidence,
Sure.
right? Like I've changed my mind on many things. I constantly change my mind. Um, but if anything, one of my faults is that I think I am too willing to change my mind. But with a lot of people, they won't even listen to something where it contradicts their worldview, and that prevents them from actually taking in the evidence. I mean, you can present the evidence. If somebody's not willing to actually take it to heart, they're going to find ways to debunk it. They're going to say the source is lying or is wrong.
But what if they're
The
right?
They could be right. In some cases they are right, but it depends on why they say what they say. So
What if
if
it's
they
the pursuit
say,
of truth? What if they're just trying to follow the logic and whatever's right?
well, if they're pursuing the logic with a curious mind as opposed to a made up mind, that's the difference. Because you can be skeptical, and you probably should be skeptical about most things, but if your skepticism comes not from wanting to defend a position, but rather wanting to explore. And I think
Mm.
that's the difference. So I think in the people that I see where they're genuinely curious, they are more willing to really look at things on the facts. And the people who want to defend, you can never say anything to them that's really going to change, because they're not coming into it with the idea that they are actually seeking truth.
Mm-hmm.
They're seeking affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very uncomfortable when that affirmation doesn't come.
Yep.
So they react in more emotional ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree.
So on your channel, what are your plans? What do you plan to do more of?
I just make it up as I go, but I like to, if I find something interesting and I think I can offer some value on something. Right now I'm out of Massachusetts. I'm traveling.
Mhm.
I'm in South Carolina taking care of my dad, and so I'm not set up to. I don't have my space I normally have, or there's no one to talk to off camera. But so if there's something interesting that comes along, I'll try and talk about it. And if I feel like I can offer something, then I will. But I'm just people ask like, well, how would you summarize what you're doing? Okay, it's critical thinking, but it's lazy thinking appears. Maybe lazy thinking is too harsh, but often it's anything that's yeah that I can contend with the thinking on. I think that's what's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, definitely like the questions that you were asking me. I mean, they are good at sort of refining where I'm coming from, what I'm thinking, and whether that stands up to my own scrutiny. So I think that's an incredibly useful thing. In terms of, I mean, so what happened with the school? Because you ended up and you made a pretty gracious post about it or video about it. But what did they provide a reason for why they laid you off?
Hmm. Yeah, I uploaded a video where I had another interaction that was almost identical and it was about J.K. Rowling coincidentally, and that's why I shared it. I was like, oh, this is so remarkably similar that this is worth sharing. And apparent there, I didn't check with a person, I, which I've never checked with before. I don't know, honestly, I don't know if that was a new rule or if it was a rule that previously existed that they decided wasn't necessary previously. I don't know, which the facts are they have every right, and you sign on when you go to teach that school. It says right in the contract you can be fired at any time for any reason, no reason. It says if you say something online that politically paints this might represent the school in a bad light, or if you insult a coworker or something, they can do whatever they want. It's not people are thinking about it in terms of like a public school. It's just not your average typical. It's more like a private business is what it runs like a business, and the person who made the decision is a business person. They were making a business decision. I'm not a victim of cancel culture. I wouldn't say it's politically motivated. It was office place politics. It's just business politics. And I would only be speculating if I were to give the reasons I can think of a variety of potential reasons. But the language that was articulated to me was, okay, you uploaded that video 8 days ago. They never said a word about me until it was like, boom, they called me in. And it was like they had it all in place. It's like they just, okay, you didn't check with so and so. And I was like, you're right. I got permission from his parents, like directly, but I didn't know I was supposed to check this box. I've never done that before. I legitimately thought I checked all the boxes. You're right. I didn't check that one. And so that's what, yeah, they're like, we don't trust you to not upload, blah, 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 blah. Um, yeah, that's what was
Yeah, this is
articulated to me
the
on the day.
difficulty. Yeah. Well, I'll just read between the lines, but I think that not what you're saying, just between the lines of the information that I'm getting. Um, but it does bring up this issue where I'm very shaky on how I feel about it, because the I do believe in free association, and I do understand that firing people sometimes, like, you think the person is a jerk, or you really hate them, and why should you pay money to someone you don't like? So
Right.
you should have that freedom on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's also contributing to a culture where, I know a lot of people have lost their jobs, and it's over things that maybe they shouldn't, that maybe were too much. And it creates this kind of effect where it's like, as a human being, you can't express yourself. Like, it's one thing to say, okay, you cannot say these things, or you can't talk about these subjects at work. I can understand that. But then somebody goes, in their private life, are they not allowed to express themselves? And now everybody lives kind of in public and private at the same time, or maybe somebody filmed that conversation, or there's it makes it difficult to be an authentic human in many ways. And at the same time, you're having to balance that with the rights of other people, where you know some people will make the argument, okay, let's say this guy's a neo-Nazi and he works at a post office and he does his job just fine, and he doesn't insult anyone. There's nothing at work that you can complain about. But do you still want to employ that person? And some people would argue, yes, uh, that should be the standard, as long as they don't do anything at work. And other people, or at least anything that like will reflect directly on the company, if they're a person that gets, like, if it explodes and it's on social media that this person works, okay, maybe. On the other hand, you know do I not have the right to not work with someone who I happen to realize is a neo-Nazi, on a day-to-day basis? I think that's a really difficult thing, and I've been going back and forth a lot on that, and whether you should have laws and protections for people's speech at work or not. And I know Elon has this thing now with lawsuits, that if somebody gets fired for speech on X, um, that he'll fund the lawsuit. But that's also, most places are at will states in the U.S., and it to me that's a very complex thing that I don't think I've really arrived at an answer yet. But wonder what you think about it.
That's a really interesting question. And I lean in the direction of freedom, where I don't think
Mhm.
anyone should be compelled to, I think they should have the right to employ whoever they want as long as there's no laws being broken. That's why we have laws. That's our railroad tracks. It's our framework. Short of the law, it's similar to freedom of speech. And this also ties into our conversation about unions. People joked, oh, well, I bet you're regretting paying your teacher union dues now. But the reality is, I'm not in a teacher's union, and I don't regret that at all. They tried to unionize my first year at the school. They tried to bring in a teachers union, and I voted against it. I don't regret that at all. What would what would the union do? Force them not to fire me? And like, okay, if I that means people are employing people that they don't want to employ, but they're being forced to by a group of people. That's kind of group think, anyways. That gets towards unions. But I think that you should be able to hire whoever you want. You shouldn't be forced to pay someone, regardless of a union or any other reason. If you don't want to, that's freedom to conduct a business. But if you're talking about a post office, that's different. It's a federal organization. And so I understand public schools, we're getting into different territory, but it's in regards to individuals, private enterprise, I would err on the side of freedom. Absolutely. I forgot what the other point I was going to make was that you were just talking about. Anyways,
I couldn't tell you,
the last
but
thing
I'm
you were
sure it was a
talking
very
about.
good one. Well, I find that with regulation, that makes it really difficult to know, because also this still creates this environment where, yeah, like the idea of forcing someone to keep an employee that they really don't want to doesn't seem like it would work, and then be a good thing. It seems like it would infringe on other people's rights. At the same time, you have this chill factor because people are so reliant on their jobs to survive. Like the alternative to not having a job is death. But I was
Well,
thinking also about, I wrote a piece about Kevin Spacey and,
mhm.
the court of public opinion versus, because he's been found not guilty in the trials, and pretty definitively, actually, in these trials. And yet, in the court of public opinion, he is still, people don't even know that he's gone to court, or they still believe that he's guilty, or they just say, well, okay, maybe he's innocent of these really bad accusations, but there's been so many accusations, and he's even admitted that, he has been inappropriate. He still deserves punishment. So then it becomes, okay, like, okay, so how do we as a society decide how much we punish someone?
If
And
I
I
can
think in the
comment,
process, yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I don't think it's the society. I think and this goes to the unions in Hollywood. It's the industry it's similar to Johnny Depp, right? And he's comparing himself to the Johnny Depp thing. Why can't I bounce back like he is? But look at what happened initially with Johnny Depp. Yes, that was unfair, and we know that now. But Hollywood are the ones that chose to close their doors. And you heard the agents testify to this in court during the Johnny Depp trial. They discussed that. They stopped calling. And why? Because of this reason. Society, we can't fix society, but you can, well, you can shine a mirror to the film industry and say, look, this is flawed, but they're the ones who are making the decisions of whether or not to hire Kevin Spacey.
They're
Yeah,
making them out of business interests too. Although people might argue, well, there's a lot of people who want to see him back, and
yeah,
therefore
I
it's
would
actually
disagree with
bad
that.
business. But you have to show that. I mean, I guess where I arrived in my story as I was writing it, sometimes I figure things out as I'm exploring them. A lot of times, actually. But I was thinking about it. It's like the big hurdle is like there are people who want to hire him because they think he's done his time and they really like him as an actor, and they'd rather have him in their film. And the hindrance to that is really like that other people will then target them for doing so.
Exactly. The industry.
Yeah. Well, the industry, but also the population. So but the industry
How would the
too. And
population
so
target them outside of the
through
industry?
campaigns, well, campaigns to bully. I mean, there's the people will flood other people's. They can harass them. They can deboost them. Having had that happen to me, I can understand how that can go down. So I think
So like
people
the
are
mob,
quite
you mean?
afraid of the mob. Yeah, people are
Okay, the
afraid of
mob.
the mob. Yeah.
But the only effect the mob can have is on advertisers, business by putting pressure on advertisers. As far as I can see,
I think
they're
a
just
lot
putting
of
pressure to.
discomfort. I mean, I think it may not physically harm you, but there's a lot of discomfort that comes from the mob. And also, the mob influences how other people behave that might have more decisions. So, like, for example, in my case, the mob tried to influence editors not to hire me.
Yeah,
In the
that'd be like
case of the
advertising.
Kevin
That's my point.
Spacey.
It's where the rubber meets
Yeah.
the road, where there's financial transactions, but that goes back to the industry. That's my point, is that it all goes back to where the rubber meets the road, which is where the deals are being made, the phone calls are being made.
But if, for example, okay, I go and I hire, I'm a Hollywood producer. I hire Kevin, and there's this public outroar. It is seen as a signal to the industry. Oh, people don't like this. We don't want to be on the wrong side of that. So I do think there is an influence that comes from that. So in general, my
That's the
thinking is that, okay, Go ahead.
That's the reality of a movie star, though. If Amber Heard, for example, whoever, if Johnny
Mhm.
Walker becomes, let's just say there's a movie star named Johnny Walker, and when Johnny Walker's in the movie, no one liked him in that role. They don't have to hire him back. That goes back to freedom of enterprise. That would be the
Sure. And
same
I would
thing.
I would never
Yeah.
force that. What I would say though is I'd like to see it where if someone makes a decision to hire him, you can choose not to go see that movie or not to support it, but just don't attack the person who made that decision, I guess is my or I'd like to have a little bit more grace in that respect.
Sure,
So
that's
that you
also the
don't
logic that's used on when star people like Nerdrotic on YouTube criticize Star Wars and stuff. They accuse them of attacking Star Wars. So how do we
Mhm.
define attack?
While attack, yeah, we define it by to me, it becomes about sort of a harassment of an individual in line, targeting them in either a way that's just excessively rude or harassing them in terms of like targeting their content, reaching out to their employers. To me, though, those are all attacks. Obviously violence is would be the next step, but most of the situations they're not violent. So
I got you.
um,
I disagree with the rude
mhm,
part, but I agree with reaching out to the employer because that's actually something that's actually measurable. They either called the
mhm.
employer or they didn't, but I can't tell you if Nerdrotic's being rude or not. That's a subjective measure.
No, that's a fair point. I think sometimes it's difficult. It's like, okay, if somebody's targeting me and just being really racist, right? There's not going to be like an agreement necessarily by everybody that this was racist. Although, even if there is like, if somebody used a slur and I'm black or something like that, um, I think most people will agree that that was rude, but
Sure,
some people might be like, who cares? Not a big deal, right?
sure,
So, um, we're never going to have, I mean, that's why hate speech is such a tricky thing. It's like you can't really regulate it because not everyone will define it the same way, and it can be misused.
hmm,
You can say anything is hate speech, but there are also things where 99% of decent people are kind of agree that it is. um,
sure,
it's just that 1% leaves a lot to interpretation, and so people who might not deserve it get caught up in that.
sure. If 99% of people think something's bad, then you got nothing to worry about because 99% of people are on your side.
That would be nice. Yes, yes. But yeah, 99% of people are
I get your
usually
point
not
there,
on
yeah.
my side. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, I mean, I think the difficulty too is navigating is like, okay, I find this with my speech, I wrote pieces that were not controversial by any means. I didn't cover politics, nothing like that. And then I started becoming more opinionated, I guess. I was always opinionated, but I wasn't super expressive of that. And now I am. And it's like, okay, I guess I'm in the same boat as you where, okay, trying to figure out the financial aspect of it, which is really difficult because I think a lot of times people who prosper end up being people who they preach to a particular choir, and
Sure.
it's
Yep.
harder to grow a herd of, a group of people who support you it enough to pay you money kind of thing with that without necessarily always agreeing with you, with actually just appreciating your process of thinking as opposed to your conclusions. And there are people like that out there. It's just it's less than the people want to hear exactly what they want to hear, and so it's tricky. And then if you work for someone else, you really most of the time you lose that ability to have that freedom. And I get it. Like I worked for a company a while ago, and with that company, I reined in my commentary because I was representing them, and I felt a responsibility there. They hired me for a reason, and so it's just very difficult to navigate that.
Yep. It
Do you
is.
think you'll teach more, or do you think this
Oh, I
is your
don't
new
know.
path?
I don't know. Honestly, it would depend on what came along. Do you hear that noise?
That's my drilling. I wasn't sure how bad it was. I
That's
guess
pretty bad. I just
it's
wasn't
pretty
sure what
bad.
it was. That's all right. Now that I know what it is, I can.
How bad is it?
It's
Tell
not that
me.
bad. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Okay.
It's,
Yeah. No.
it's
It's apparently the next 10 weeks of suffering and torture, and this is not even as loud as it gets. I couldn't hear my own mind think. That's going to make podcasting very difficult, for sure. Well, I hope you do. You know, this is a problem because I do think like the way you ask questions and the openness, I think, is something that's really important and really missing from a lot of schools. There are teachers who do this, but they're not overwhelmingly endorsed.
Yeah, it gets challenging, and I really enjoy like what we were just doing. That's what I really enjoy that. That's when I'm at my best, is when I'm someone genuinely thinks something. I hate debates where it's just debating for the debate's sake. But like the conversations we've had during this conversation, we're really when it's going back and forth and you have a view and I see some things and I'm trying to that's fun. And I
I
feel like
find
that's where
that
my
fun
strength is.
too. I think also what happens, if I'm like entirely honest, because I think it's important to be, is I can feel in myself because there's a lot of times where I'm talking and I'm not being challenged on my thinking, and people just kind of endorse it. Um, so having the questions, it creates a moment of discomfort, right? And it's not massive, but there is an ego element that comes out. So there is a part of me that goes, what if I'm wrong? And so, but then what I do enjoy about it is that it allows me to think of more deeply about why I'm saying what I'm saying and be more clear. I do that a lot more when I'm writing because that the process through which I write, that's the process I undergo. But when I speak, not always. And so it allows me to clarify my thoughts a little bit more. And there might be blind spots. I mean, there are definitely blind spots. So I think it's important as much as there is discomfort, but it's also important to recognize there's an ego there
Yeah.
and have allow a little bit of humility too.
Yeah,
But
and
I but I
you're
do like it.
perfect at that. Yeah, you're perfect at this for that reason. I feel like if we do have that debate, it would be really interesting. We cannot call it a debate. We can call it a conversation.
Yeah,
Because
that's probably comes
we should do this again though, because it's genuinely you have that quality of what you were just articulating, where
of like
you
looking.
don't get
Yeah,
defensive.
appreciate.
You're
No.
willing to continue. If you're willing to continue and not get defensive, those two things will take you so far in this. You're actually thinking
Well,
about what you're saying.
yeah,
So
and I'm never going to get defensive at the person who asked the question. If I get angry, it's going to be at myself for not maybe thinking something through. It's not usually going to be because if you're able to poke that or ask that question and I don't have a good answer for it, then that I see that as my failing. So the frustration that I might feel, it comes from me kind of lashing out at myself, not the other person. But I do know people often lash out at the other person because of that feeling. Um, no, but I think it's very useful because your thinking is not going to get better if you
yes,
aren't willing to undergo this.
yes, I've done this a few
And I love
times now.
doing it to other people.
Yeah.
I just recognize something that I do this so much to other people, but people rarely do this to me. And now I know what it feels like. But there's a part of me that really enjoys it too. So
Yes.
I appreciate it, even if I have these moments of ego or discomfort. I still appreciate it, and I think with people, sometimes the reactions I'll get, they'll be all over the place. I think some people like it, and
Yeah.
I think some people really feel threatened. So it explains to me a little bit more as to why sometimes I'll get negative reactions from people when I do it. I do it a lot in the film industry, by the way, because that was my practice ground. Because I would go to a lot of the film industry events and
Oh boy.
pre-COVID. Yeah,
Yeah, that's where you're gonna run into ego for sure.
I loved it though. That was so much fun for me. But I
Yeah.
also I think I really didn't care I didn't do it with any malicious intent, and I kind of liked provoking people, especially people with big egos. So I would toy with people all the time.
Yeah, it's just
And the
being willing
more
to like
important,
examine it. That it's like not ego, it's not malicious. You made a good point about that. It's just being willing to, all right, what do you mean by that? Hang on, wait a sec. Like ask the question that you're thinking. Some people don't expect it. You're absolutely right. But like I've been
no,
fortunate to where I've been able to sit down with a few people now in these past few months, and this has been one of the most interesting back and forths I've had because we've actually like implemented everything that I enjoy about critical thinking. This wasn't just tell me about your video and getting fired and blah blah blah, and they all follow the same format. It gets so boring. This was something
get that.
different. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's like you do it because you're like, well, the audience needs some context, but it's nice to have things kind of go wherever they go
Those
and
drills.
have the drills become part of the conversation. Should I ask the people
No, it's
drilling,
all good.
like if they're right? No, I can
I
never ask
figure
them
we're
to
almost
stop.
done anyways, right? Yeah,
We are. But I was going to make a joke about like asking the people who are drilling some critical thinking questions, and
yeah. Yeah, like why now? Or I guess when
oh
else? But
no, it's going to be all day, every day, 6 days a week from morning. It's
what are they? Is this in your
psychological
house?
torture.
Is this in your
It's a
house or an apartment?
condo.
Okay.
It's an apartment, yeah. So the whole
Okay.
building is worked on. It's an incredibly awful thing, and
Unions
it's
making the jobs take
this
longer.
is what happens when you don't have union protection.
I would
Okay, our
argue the
next conversation,
opposite.
we'll make it about union. I need to find someone who's like super pro union. I'm like,
You sound perfect
I
for it.
think
Let's
I'm in
just
the
do
middle.
this again, just you and Nate.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, let's do it.
All right. Well,
Okay.
thank you. I look
Well,
forward
thank
to
you
it.
so much for joining me. It was really fun.
Absolutely. It
I'm
was my
glad to
pleasure.
do
Thank
it.
you so much. Good luck with the drills.
I appreciate it. Thank you, and good luck with everything.
Yeah, thank you. Let's
Okay.
talk again. Bye.